Hello, everybody, and welcome to the QuidCon panel, The State of Quidditch, where we've been, where we are, and where we're going. I'm Alex Benepe, I'm your moderator, and I'm pleased to introduce the panelists today who you'll be hearing from shortly. We have Dallas, co-commissioner of Major League Quidditch. We have Yara, executive director of Quidditch Canada. Pauline, events director and board member of International Quidditch Association. Mary, executive director of US Quidditch. And Ethan, co-commissioner of Major League Quidditch. You'll be hearing from all of the panelists shortly. I'm going to be starting off with where we've been. Just a few notes on our presentation. I'm going to cover sort of where we've been and start to touch on where we are as a sport. And from there, we're going to go to our panelists. We're going to start with some prepared remarks, and then I'm going to be giving our panelists some questions about where they think the sport is and where it's going. At any point during the presentation, if you have any questions or comments, feel free to drop them in the chat, and time permitting, we will answer them throughout the presentation. Any questions we don't get to, we will address at the end. So without further ado, let's get started by starting at the beginning. As many of you, if not all of you know, Quidditch started at Middlebury College, a remote, beautiful green place with a tiny population. And in 2005, I was a freshman there with my hallmate and friend, Xander Manchel. And every Sunday, we would play bocce, which soon evolved into real-life Quidditch. And you may ask, why did we play bocce and real-life Quidditch on Sundays? Well, let me tell you a little bit about 2005 for those of you who don't remember. Netflix at the time was DVDs only. Facebook was 1 year old. YouTube was 4 months old. Instagram and Twitter didn't exist. So in other words, J.K. Rowling was still popular. There was no Wi-Fi in our dorms. If you wanted internet, you had to plug your laptop in with a cable. There were no iPhones or smartphones. This is literally the phone model I had going to college with. And Harry Potter was at peak mania. Half-Blood Prince had just been published and Goblet of Fire was in theaters. So for bored college students who even got bored of bocce, we began asking ourselves, what can we do next? And that turned to fictional sports. And we decided to try to play real-life Quidditch. These are pictures from the very first day of Quidditch. We had hula hoops taped to chairs, and we didn't even have enough hula hoops, so you just had to throw the ball at a garbage can to score. That's me in the back. The snitch was a dirty tennis ball taped to someone's shirt with duct tape. And I'd tell this story a lot, but I have a photo to prove it. There was a kid who thought you had to bring your own broom and couldn't find one, so he showed up with a lamp that he rode around the pitch on. Fast forward one more next year to 2006, and Xander let me take over running the league. We hosted an intramural cup that got picked up by the Wall Street Journal and ESPN, and this was the beginning of the media craze around Quidditch. The following year, Quidditch blossomed at Middlebury, became quite huge, and we hosted Vassar College for the first ever intercollegiate match, and this is what we call World Cup 1 from back in the day. We were pretty audacious with our naming. USA Today covered this, and again, the media led more teams to join the league. And in the interview with USA Today, I told them we were doing a road trip the next spring to other colleges, which we hadn't planned at all. So after they published it, we had to do it. So we went on the road with vans loaded with Quidditch players and Quidditch equipment. We had signs on the back of our vans that said, honk if you love Harry Potter, and another sign that said, honk if you hate Harry Potter. So everyone honked at us. And we got a ton of media coverage, including live on CBS early show to 3 million people from Amherst College. And hundreds of teams reached out to us after this point. And maybe our greatest acquisition was that this is how Alicia Radford discovered Quidditch and soon became, as many of you know, a vital part of the sport. Moving ahead now to 2008, here is the earliest version of the IQA, now USQ logo painted on a wooden panel. And in 2008, we had 12 colleges join us for the second World Cup. And before the event would start, the teams would gather in front of Mead Chapel, which is an old church in Middlebury that housed a very rare instrument called a carillon, which is composed of dozens of 2-ton bells that can be played like a piano using this very weird device. And the carillon player learned how to play the Hedwig's theme song from Harry Potter and played this during our opening ceremony. And I actually have an audio recording, which I'm going to play for you here as I show you some images from the second World Cup. It still gives me chills all these years later. And this World Cup, we really put a lot of effort into making it quite an event. There were acrobats and circus performers. Local groups brought animals. Chestnut Hill College brought a saxophone playing priest. And I think my favorite part was that a chemistry professor blew things up while an a cappella group sang Double, Double, Toil and Trouble. The following year, the event continued to grow. And we had teams come from as far away as Texas. This was Texas A&M's first appearance. And Middlebury continued to dominate the event. All right, now it's 2010. Let's take a check-in on where the world is at. We're in the middle of a global economic recession. Obama is US president. Instagram was released this year along with the first iPad. BP spilled millions of barrels of oil into the ocean. There's the swine flu pandemic, a horrible earthquake in Haiti, the FIFA World Cup in South Africa when the rest of the world learned what vuvuzelas were. Deathly Hallows Part 1 premiered. The last year of Capes in Quidditch. The IQA is incorporated and Quidditch comes to New York City. And here's a picture of, I partnered with some students to create a promo video for World Cup 2010. World Cup in New York City was on a totally different scale. We had 50 teams. Having a skyline in the background really changed the vibe of the event. And the following year, we made it even bigger in New York. This is a watercolor I made prior to the event, kind of envisioning what it was like. And while it certainly looks good, this was a really troubled event. We were stretched financially and logistically and really in over our heads with over 100 teams participating. And Middlebury still managed to hang on and win, but this was their last World Cup win, at least so far. So after the event, we sat down and looked at the challenges the sport was facing, which is that World Cup was too big. We needed more money and reffing needed to improve. So we came up with solutions. One was to implement regional qualifiers. 2 was to get cities to bid for events in Quidditch. And 3 was to establish really robust referee programs. So I got on the road and went to qualifiers across the US, including the South, the Southwest, the West, the Midwest, and Mid-Atlantic, the Northeast, and Canada, as well as Oceania and Europe, which I didn't get to go to, but these qualifiers were taking place. And this picture, if you're curious, is Queens College, where all the students get matching hats called TAMs. It's amazing and adorable, and you should go if you can. Or sorry, Queens University. Also, not a regional qualifier, but we did a big expo match that year in London as an official part of a torch lighting event. And this was a really awesome event because it kind of was the groundwork. It laid the seeds for what would become the IQA and the new World Cup format. That same year, the first QuidCon took place in person, not virtual, in Chicago. And then the following year was World Cup 6. And having taken 2 years off and restructured and upped our reffing game, and this allowed teams lots of time to practice and get better, this was a real convalescence of the major improvements made in the sport. And to top it off, UT Austin was the first team besides Middlebury to hoist the World Cup over their heads. And this was a major defining moment in the sport. Shortly after this, we hired the first full-time salaried staff in the sport of Quidditch history. And then the global games took place in 2014, a follow-up, an improvement from the 2012 summer games with even more nations participating, again laying the groundwork for the future of IQA in the World Cup, with USA taking gold. Major League Quidditch was launched in 2014 by Dallas and Ethan, who you'll be hearing from shortly. And World Cup 7 and 8 continued. I call this the phase at which I stopped understanding out of bounds rules. And Texas continued their reign of dominance in both World Cups 7 and 8. And this is the time that Alicia and I both stepped back from our roles running the organization day to day. Obviously, we've stayed involved, but this is a very bittersweet picture for me because it represents the end of a really awesome chapter in my life. We were both sort of excited and ready to move on, but also looking back, we were very proud of how far the sport had come. But of course, Quidditch went on just fine without us. So let's look at where the world in Quidditch was in 2015. There were major arrests at FIFA. This is when Trump announced he was running for president. The Black Lives Matter movement was taking off. Gay marriage was finally fully legalized in 2015. I'm sure some of our international partners watching this are rolling their eyes thinking, God, it took you this long. The Paris Climate Accord was created, and in the spirit of international cooperation, this is when the real, true, sort of new form of the IQA was created, along with national governing bodies. Off-pitch seeking disappeared this year, and there was an explosion of new national governing bodies. Australia, Canada, UK, Belgium, France, Italy, Mexico, Turkey, Germany, Spain, Norway. These all formed just in those 4 years. I'm going to get more to internationals in a moment, but just a quick overview of what happened in the US in 2016 to 2019. The major themes were that college and club teams split because club teams began to become very dominant. It made sense to put them in their own sector, their own section. University of Rochester kind of took the crown from Texas in 2018, and then Texas took it back in 2019. And importantly, rules were rolled out involving stalling and two-hand tackles to really improve the game. On the international scene, 2016 was when the first big sort of real World Cup happened in Frankfurt, Germany. And in a huge upset, Australia beat US in the finals. And I remember sitting on the sidelines watching this game. It was one of the most thrilling games I had seen to date. And it was wild seeing how far Team Australia had come. You know, just 2 years ago, the US steamrolled everyone, and now watching a match where the teams were going point for point was just thrilling. QPL, Quidditch Premier League, was founded shortly after this. And then in 2018, Italy hosted the Florence World Cup, which was remarkable because we saw some new teams really rise up to the winner's circle, with Turkey coming in third, Belgium coming in second, and US reclaimed their crown, but it was really cool watching their final match against Belgium. In 2019, just going to toot my own horn a little bit here, we started a group called the Quidditch Alumni Association. You know, we're getting to a point where there's more people who are former players than current players. So I think it's about time we do what other sports do and keep those former players in the network. And as we, you know, move on in our lives and our careers, we donate back to the sport to keep it going. A lot of sports get their lifeblood from previous players who donate to keep it going. And that's what we're hoping to do with the Quidditch Alumni Association. So I've covered sort of where we've been. I'm going to go over a couple of slides on where we are, and then we're going to go to the leaders of today to talk more about that. Organized Quidditch is played in 51 countries. There are tens of thousands of regular players. 29 nations attended the last World Cup. So it's grown wildly, but there's huge challenges ahead of us. Obviously, COVID-19 has been quite a challenge for all organized sports. We need to continue to grow, recruit, and retain players. We need to figure out how we're going to work with the Harry Potter brand. How do we maintain that connection or sever it or grow beyond it? How do we expand the sport to new age demographics? How do we become more financially stable? And perhaps most important of all, how do we improve the equity of experience and opportunity in our sport for all, and especially for Black, Indigenous, and people of color, LGBTQ+, and women in our sport. So easy for me to list off all those challenges, much harder for the leaders of today and tomorrow to address them. And that's who you're going to hear from now. And we're going to start off with prepared remarks. And Yara from QUIDDITCH Canada is going to lead us off. So without further ado, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Alex. Good evening, everyone. I hope everyone's been having an absolute blast at QuidCon. I know I certainly have. As you know, my name is Yara. I use she, her pronouns. I've been the executive director of QUIDDITCH Canada since September 2019, and I've been volunteering with the NSO since 2017. I've been a player and a coach with QUIDDITCH Canada and with Major League QUIDDITCH, and I love the sport. That's why I'm here. I love the sport, I love the game, and I love helping it grow. So a little bit more about QUIDDITCH Canada. QUIDDITCH Canada is the National Sports Organization, or NSO, for the sport of Quidditch in Canada. Super redundant, I know, it's a mouthful, but you'd be surprised at how often that needs to be spelled out, particularly when I'm talking to external stakeholders. So we're a registered charitable organization. We incorporated in 2014, the same year as NLQ. We are entirely volunteer run, and we are very much what I would call a member-centered organization. And so what I mean by that is that, as Alex very illustratively laid out, by the time QUIDDITCH Canada was formed, there were already many people playing Quidditch, and specifically many teams in Canada that were playing Quidditch and accessing what was at the time known as the IQA. And so what was needed when QUIDDITCH Canada was formed was an NSO that could represent Canadian teams and interests and provide necessary administrative support north of the border. And so as the organization has grown, our members continue to be our major stakeholder. And while we're a small enough organization, we can really benefit from being able to deliver programs and services that meet their needs in a way that is defined by them. And so even when we actually only very recently transitioned to a split board model. So we now have a board of directors that's voted in every year. And we legislated into our bylaws that our members, our teams, were the stakeholders that would vote for our board of directors. So we really look to ensure that our member-centered approach is built into the governance and infrastructure of our organization. We're working to foster and promote a version of Quidditch at every age and at every level in every province. And territory eventually. Primarily, we're currently serving collegiate and young adult player hubs across Canada. And prior to COVID, we were also starting to expand our youth programs and our non-contact programs as well. And I just want to pour one out for our national championship in Edmonton that would have happened last year, because there were actually plans to incorporate a youth level tournament that would have been integrated into the schedule of our national championship. So that's all the more reason to get back and bring youth Quidditch to the mainstream, which is something that we're really actively working towards. At QUIDDITCH Canada, we really see our sport as one that has massive amounts of potential to model what safe, fun, fair, and equitable sport can look like. And we see it as our responsibility as an NSO to uphold that standard, not just within the Quidditch community, but broadly modeling that across Canada for other sports organizations in Canada. And so while COVID has been essentially a pause on how we normally do things, it's also been an opportunity for us to explore what it means to be an NSO to deliver on that vision. So I'm just going to share a couple highlights of recent projects that we've been able to work on in the last year. So the primary thing has been tons of virtual engagement events run by our amazing volunteers. I don't know if Alexandria, Jen, and Joseph, I always butcher your last name, Joseph, I'm so sorry. I don't know if they're here, but they have been incredible offering these kinds of events all season long. And we've been able to develop a framework that will allow us to continue to offer those kinds of experiences even after COVID, which is super exciting. We recently launched a new membership level, an educator membership, and this targets teachers and educators, as well as resources on how to bring Quidditch into classrooms. That's also something we're working on growing. I want to talk a little bit about our new merchandising partner, VC Ultimate. I feel like this is something that MLQ and USQ, you folks are just like, we've been there, done that. But for us, it's a huge accomplishment for us to say, we have a store, it's on our website, VC Ultimate does all the work. And that really helps us in terms of marketing and branding. But what I really love about the VC Ultimate partnership is that it's been one where we can explore shared values. And so I think it's really cool that I can say I've had in-depth conversations with the people at VCU about social justice in sport. That's not something that I think other sports organizations can necessarily say about their merchandising partners. So I think that's a really unique opportunity. And then last summer, we also held a successful community fundraiser to donate money to 5 incredible organizations serving Black and Indigenous people in Canada. And that's really positioned us to think generally about what it means for QC to have partners. What do we have to offer as an organization? So I think we're really well positioned to do lots of incredible work in the future. Some of the things that are upcoming include a whole suite of online courses for our members. So in the fall, we piloted an anti-racism, anti-oppression course. And we're working on delivering other courses through essentially a QC course library, including a coaching course, maybe a referee course eventually, courses for administrators. So building our capacity building, which is exciting. We are working on growing our team brand infrastructure so that we can give teams the resources that they need to gain footholds in their communities. And COVID permitting, we also have plans to launch a series of NSO run, so in-house run recruitment and outreach events. Normally, the burden of that goes on our local teams, but we want to be able to help in the development of that infrastructure. And we're really hoping that can kickstart Quidditch again, bring the sport back into the community. And then, as I said, we want to strengthen our capacity for partnership. We have a lot to learn from partners, especially other amateur sports organizations. We started to have conversations with Dodgeball Canada and Ultimate Canada about what we can learn from them as sort of the younger sibling in the sports world. But we also, I think, have a lot to offer. And what I mean by that is that when I was first introduced to Quidditch, it was sort of implied that the expectation was that Quidditch has a long way to go. We have to catch up to other sports. In Canada, that's widely accepted as meaning that we should be working towards Sports Canada funding and modeling our infrastructure after other Sports Canada funded organizations. And I really want to challenge that, because I don't think that there's anything that says we have to do things how other NSOs have done things, or if that's even necessarily the right path for us. If we were to seriously pursue, funding by Sports Canada, we'd have to throw tons of money into administration, which I don't think is in our best interests. We'd have to be looking at a lot more hierarchical governance models. We'd have to adopt a lot of policies that don't actually reflect our values. And so when I talk to people about Quidditch Canada, I describe us as a grassroots national sports organization. I think that people see that there's a contradiction in that. When people think grassroots, they think under-resourced or small or temporary. And I don't think that's the case. I think we can be grassroots, we can still grow, we can still be expansive, but also ensure that our local community context across Canada is informing our priorities and our next steps. So yeah, that's pretty much all I have to say. Thank you so much. I'm really excited about the conversation we're going to have.
Awesome. Thank you so much for the insight, Yara. Next up, we have Mary from US Quidditch.
Hi, everyone. My name is Mary Kimball, and I'm USQ's Executive Director. I identify as queer, and my pronouns are she, her. I first got involved with Quidditch 6 years ago. Since then, I've played mostly in the Pacific Northwest, in the US and Canada, in summer pickup games and fantasy tournaments, but I've gotten to travel across the country, helping to run different events for USQ, so there's a good chance we've met before. A lot has changed about USQ since I joined the organization in 2015, and tonight I'm excited to tell y'all about what we're working on and what we're pushing for. US Quidditch is a 501c3 nonprofit organization and the national governing body for the sport of Quidditch in the US. We advance the sport by organizing events and programs that build community and empower adult and youth athletes of all identities, including all races and genders, to compete together. USQ is currently the largest Quidditch league in the world. We serve an average of 3,000 athletes and 130 teams each season nationwide. USQ's programs and services are currently geared towards college club teams, and most of the people we serve are between 17 and 30 years old. Internally, we have about 100 people on our staff, 3 paid employees, and 97 year-round volunteers, with nearly 40 new volunteers having joined us in the last year alone. USQ staffers are enthusiastic about our work. We are accountable, we are visionary, we have a flexible, aspirational leadership style, and we are well-rounded communicators. Our staff are team players, and we adhere to a high standard of excellence. USQ aims to create a range of competitive opportunities for those that want to play with us, centered around 2 key values: player safety and gameplay integrity. We host regional and national championships, supervise regular season competition, support and certify referees, snitches, coaches, and tournament directors, offer grants, and work to expand the sport into younger age groups through outreach programs at the elementary, middle, and high school levels. Success for USQ in the next several years will mean more teams and members. Success with teams also incorporates conferences, which are an integral part of recruitment and retention. I want USQ to have a stronger relationship with Quidditch conferences, and for more teams, especially those in the collegiate division, to have an affiliation with a conference. Success means additional programming for younger age groups, starting with the release and implementation of our PE curriculum. On the event side, all USQ events need to have high quality multi-camera live streams. And most importantly, we need to center diversity, equity, and inclusion across all levels of USQ so that our programs and events are safe for those from marginalized communities, especially LGBTQIA+ and Black, Indigenous, and people of color. And as Yara mentioned, with what Quidditch Canada is doing and trying to be a model in Canada, USQ aims to be doing the same thing with our city partners and peer sport organizations in the US. We want to challenge the notion of what a sports league can be and redefine what the experience of diversity, equity, inclusion, what that potential really is, because there's so much left that we can do to make this sport the best it can be. Over the next 12 months, our biggest priority will be to support teams as they begin returning to play. At the same time, USQ is also laying the groundwork for future growth, meaning growth in membership, growth in fan base, and growth financially. We know that many teams have brand new leaders right now, leaders who may not have gotten to experience a more typical transition from one president or manager to another. We're increasing the amount of support available to teams, making sure they are set up for success for the 21-22 season. This season, we've expanded the member services department to include new member relations, leadership development, and athlete development teams. These staff teams, along with regional coordinators, are preparing new resources and streamlined communications for next season for our teams. The member service department has also increased the number of grants available next season to help cover the cost of team and individual player memberships, as well as the cost of attaining equipment like hoops and bases. The gameplay department is revamping how snitches and referees get certified and improve their officiating skills, including creating new educational video resources and other training opportunities. A cross-section of staff groups are also working to restructure the season to make it easier for teams to participate this coming fall and next spring, and as well as to create long-lasting improvements in subsequent seasons. In the communications department, staff has been revamping how we spotlight teams and members, as well as expanding the scope of USQ's live stream capabilities. And more information on what teams can expect from USQ next season will be released later this spring.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Mary. Next up, we have Major League Quidditch, Ethan and Dallas. Sorry, I'm not sure which of you is going first.
That's all right. And thank you, Alex. And thank you so much for that presentation at the beginning. It was truly something. I really enjoyed it.
How'd you like
everybody, I'm Ethan Sturm.
And I'm Amanda Dallas.
And we're the co-founders and co-commissioners of Major League Quidditch. My pronouns are he and him.
And mine are she and her.
Before we get started on our remarks, I just want to take out a moment to shout out some of our volunteers that have kind of been the backbone of this event, which has truly been an incredible event. Emily Hickmott, Tuesday Nolan, Clay Dockery, Christian Barnes. I've put in so much work to this event, and it's really, really shown. Emily and Tuesday, I've been lucky enough to be there from the very beginning of their Quidditch journeys, and it's been such an honor watching them develop within this sport and as people. Clay's been around as basically as long as I have. He's always been an underheralded volunteer in this sport. He's done so much good work. And Christian, I really think needs no introduction at this point. He's such a dynamo. MLQ is really blessed with the incredible volunteers we have. And it's truly what allows us to do what we can do. I mean, me and Dallas can only do so much. Dallas probably more than me, but it is our volunteers that really make the world spin. So let's talk a little bit about Major League Quidditch, which is a 501c4 organization. MLQ is the most competitive Quidditch league in North America. Our primary goal is to elevate Quidditch to its highest possible level of play, and that means a lot of different things. This includes from a gameplay perspective, so that's on improving the rules, getting the highest talent on the field, etc. It means from a marketing perspective, in terms of film and coverage. It also means from an events perspective, trying to put on the best possible events we can. We have currently 15 teams spread across 3 divisions in major cities across the United States, as well as Canada. And each team is made up of the best talent from its local area. We consider ourselves a league for the best of the best, as well as those who aspire to be the best of the best. We have recently increased our practice squad program, which is a squad connected to an MLQ franchise that practices alongside them. And we've seen it be a great source to allow younger players to play alongside these veterans, learn from them, and become the next generation for those teams and within our league. We want to present Quidditch in an elegant, highly consumable form, and we're going to talk about that more later in our remarks, but that includes high quality film and regular coverages and more extensive stats, ideally. And our core values are innovation, integrity, respect, and teamwork.
MLQ's branding has always been very clear-cut and focused. As Ethan mentioned, our primary goal is to elevate Quidditch to the highest possible level of play. One of our core values he mentioned is innovation. And I don't think there's anyone who's ever had an experience with our league that would tell you we aren't forward thinkers and constantly fiddling with all facets of the sport to figure out how we can bring you the best possible product. From the top down, we have analytical thinkers with incredible problem-solving capabilities. I would also characterize our volunteers as adaptable, flexible, and efficient. And while some enter the MLQ fold with those traits, others have developed them along the way. And that development is able to take place because we place a huge emphasis on lifting up our staff and giving them the opportunity to own their own portion of MLQ. And that leads me to some of our goals. On a volunteer front, we want to develop the future. I tell individuals that join at the assistant level that the expectations that they do ask questions, they do ask to be involved in other areas, and they look to branch out from roles that are not dictated on paper for them. We want every member of our organization to have opportunities to learn everything they possibly can from the current leaders within MLQ and outside of MLQ. On the field, we want to, no pun intended, push the boundaries. No sport is perfect. Professional leagues around the world are still tinkering with their game. And so long as Quidditch is played, MLQ will continue to tinker. On and off the field, we aim to make this sport better. Christian Barnes and our DEI team have been doing an absolutely incredible job this past year with their cross-functional efforts. You can head to mlquidditch.com/DEI to see some of those efforts. And all of our volunteers have reaffirmed their commitment to fostering a diverse, equitable, and inclusive environment. And that is shown in how our projects are approached. And we really do our best to look at everything we produce through a DEI lens. And I just want to shout out Yara really quickly for taking off her QC hat briefly this year to work with MLQ to complete our equity audit. It's been huge for us internally, and I highly recommend other organizations take that step. Not sure if Yara has time to help you, but you never know. She could be convinced. Another goal of ours that will be perpetually improving season after season is the digital media experience. Miguel Esparza leads a department of truly brilliant individuals, and they're not only striving to get MLQ regularly broadcasted on sports networks, but also to be able to provide an in-house production experience that rivals other semi-pro leagues. This further ties into our desire to create a fan experience you have yet to see in Quidditch. We want you to be able to put on your Toronto Raiders or your San Antonio Soldados jersey and update your fantasy lineup with a Tana Crow or Brooke Willett Langlanais before Saturday's game. we still have a really long way to go, and we're excited to do it with our incredible staff. We're very confident that these individuals will help us continue to foster not only an entertaining, competitive space, but a diverse and equitable one as well.
When we talk about what success in Quidditch looks like, maybe it doesn't necessarily look identical from organization to organization, but I think overall QC, USQ, and MLQ are on a similar page about kind of where the sport needs to go. For us, we see it as becoming a sport in a form that everyone wants to play, can play. We can't succeed as MLQ without a large recruiting base and a large fan base. And the way sports generally work is that people who have played the sport are the ones who are that recruiting base and who eventually become the fans. It's something we've touched on a number of times. Alex's alumni association really speaks to the importance of that. We need to increase the number of teams and players. We say we're a national sport in the US, but it's really only in a technical sense. We are played coast to coast, but there are massive gaps in the country where Quidditch simply isn't played. MLQ, we can't even claim to be a transcontinental sport because we're not currently on the West Coast, which is a place we strive to get back to sooner rather than later. In order for all of this to happen, we need Quidditch to be accepted as a relatively standard, everyday activity. We want kids leaving their rec quid matches, getting home to play pickup Quidditch with their friends, maybe more the Q3 or Q5 version of the sport. If anybody missed that panel, I highly suggest going and checking it out. It's a really great presentation from Quidditch Mexico. And then we want them watching the MLQ match over dinner at home. In order for the sport to continue to grow, we also need improved parity. And that goes back to the regionalization of the sport. We know, and I'm pretty sure USQ would say the same, we're cognizant of the fact that our champions have been very small numbers of teams. And that becomes from just how strong the sport is in certain regions of the country. The more national we can make this sport, the more people we can get into the sport, the more the parity will naturally become. And hopefully by increasing the recruiting base, we can do all of that. The last thing for MLQ is we need that dedicated and low turnover fan base, which I think is something that's going to be touched on a lot tonight as we continue to work towards developing that.
Yeah, and we'll sort of close up MLQ section with some project announcements. We've touched on it in our previous DEI updates, but we're very excited to be introducing our cultural inclusion guides later this month. For those who don't know, the intent of these resource guides is to help coaches and teams provide a safe and inclusive environment for all of their athletes. We're also putting the finishing touches on our anti-bias training module for officials, which the intent is for that to eventually develop into something for all of our volunteers and hopefully a resource we can make public for other organizations to use as well. And we're putting the finishing touches on our commentator training program. Shout out to Kieran Collier and Nick Jablonski, who have been working very hard with Ethan Sturm on this, and Emma and Christian, the rest of the DEI team, who have been phenomenal in combing through to make sure we've touched on all the points we need to. All that being said, we have a number of very big projects coming down the pipeline to be announced later this year that we're sure will be pivotal in transforming the state of Quidditch. And while we can't really elaborate right now, these projects will help us take down barriers, some of which we mentioned, that will make it easier for us to pursue our big goals and make Quidditch more accessible.
Thank you both for sharing all of that on Major League Quidditch. Next up, we have Pauline to speak to us from the International Quidditch Association. The floor is yours, Pauline.
Thanks, Alex. I would like to start with thanking USQ, MLQ, and Quidditch Canada for hosting QuidCon and having this platform where everyone can share their experiences. So I'm Pauline, my pronouns are she, her, and I'm the International Quidditch Association Events Director, and I am on the IQA Board of Trustees as the Secretary and a Trustee. I live in Belgium and I started playing Quidditch in November 2014, so that's a couple of months after Global Games in Canada. While I'm currently still a member of a team, I'm no longer an active player and have shifted my focus towards volunteering, both as a referee and a tournament organizer. Through Quidditch, I've had the opportunity to travel to events in multiple countries and work with people from all over the world. Alex has given a great introduction to the time that led up to the IQA becoming the organization it is now. The IQA is the international governing body for the sport, with around 40 member NGVs and around 100 volunteers. Our mission is to lead and promote the sport by holding international events, supporting NGVs, and supporting other Quidditch groups by communicating about Quidditch and sharing our values of gender equity and inclusivity with a broader audience. We have a broad target audience where we directly report to and work with our members, the NGVs. And through them, we also serve the wider community, the athletes, volunteers, supporters, and fans of the sports, and other people we partner with, potential future partners and media. The IQA aims to set global standards for Quidditch in rules, policies, and requirements. We bring NGVs together and give them a platform to talk to each other and to the IQA. We support NGVs by providing resources and putting policies in place to help them run their organizations, as well as offer development funds to our associate members. We organize and run Continental Games and World Cup, all of which have required heavy input during the recent pandemic. We provide regular rulebook, referee tests, and referee training resources. Our translations team works on translations of our most important resources and policies to 10 languages in order to ensure that these are accessible to a broader audience. The goal is to have more documents and resources translated, but this does need a large volunteer base. Currently, it's our largest volunteer groups with around 40 to 50 translators making up half of our volunteers. And lastly, our IT department has done great work with the membership or management hub, where we host our referee tests and have membership section where NGVs can input their teams and player size. This has given us a good overview of how large the community actually is globally. In the past, the IQA has struggled a lot, but this has improved over the last couple of years. And it's important to recognize that there are still problems we are facing. Due to multiple organizational leadership roles changing, directors have not had clear expectations and often flip-flopping between overly strict and overly lenient leaders. If you wish to have high-performing and trustworthy leaders in the IQA, it has to be clear what needs to be contributed to the organization and what consequences exist for our leaders. Low volunteer recruitment and unfocused department has led to lower productivity than would be desired. The IQA has recognized the problem and is working on restructuring projects to overhaul to the operational side and how it's being managed, as well as a strategic planning committee that has started working on our long-term plans and vision for the organization. Success for the IQA over the next couple of years means recovering from the COVID-19 pandemic, both for the IQA and our member NGVs. It also means gaining financial stability, building a better relationship with our NGVs, and supporting them in stabilization and growth, as well as expanding our member base. It is also to increase communications and transparency towards the community. This has improved a lot over the last few years, but there's still a very long way to go. Success means running a great World Cup and setting us up for a good standard of future international events, including Continental Games, from the location selection to packing up the chairs at the end of the event. Success for the IQA looks like an organization that supports and uplifts marginalized and minority voices. Our BIPOC committee have been working on some amazing things, and we cannot wait to share them with the community. And we are not a successful organization until we and our events are safe for everyone to attend. Over a longer period, we see success as bringing the sport to more areas, becoming a household name, a world where there is more media recognition and no need to answer the question, so how does a snitch work? Being able to partner with other international events and having financial growth for the IQA, which we can then reinvest in our members and the sport, is very important for us. An ideal version of Quidditch would be one that's easily accessible and recognizable, but ultimately is different for each target audience. The broad scope of our audience makes this challenging. We want the sport to continue to be attractive to athletes of all athleticism levels, with the World Cup as a flagship event being the most competitive one, but encouraging growth through allowing for regional teams to attend our continental games. The IQA is working on a couple really exciting projects. I want to give a big shout out to our IT department, who have been researching alternative platforms for Facebook for the community to be able to come together, have discussions, and share news. And we are now in a beta testing stage for the platform. I am very excited about the work the BIPOC committee has done and how that will improve events processes for the upcoming cycles. And really want to thank Christian Barnes in leading that committee. The gameplay department is working on a process to move away from a testing as training strategy and have started with referee resource videos a couple of months ago. Our membership department has been compiling data from our NGVs with an overview of all teams globally. And I think it's really interesting to see all of those listed in one document. And this is only a couple of things that the IQA is up to, but I'm excited about them all and look forward to sharing them with the community.
Thank you so much for that overview, Pauline. We're about to get into our Q&A section. Our first question is, what are some trends that you have seen in recruitment? And these trends are both difficulties and successes across national governing bodies. And we'd like to start this question with Pauline.
Yeah, so it's important to recognize that most of our NGBs are majority community-based and have less opportunities to recruit from universities or from ex-university team players. And this brings some unique challenges to recruitment. I was recently listening to a podcast, a QUIDDITCH podcast, where the speaker was talking about team recruitment and pointed out that their main recruitment drive came from bringing friends to training. This unfortunately limits the team and the reach that a team has. It's something that Belgium, for example, has struggled with. They have seen a decline in teams over the last couple of years, where they've gone from around 12 teams a few years ago to 7 teams spread over 4 clubs currently. Teams are more likely to recruit people who look like them. And when you have a group of petite people doing the recruitment, it's, I think, also more likely that you'll engage petite players. And similar for the more athletic people and athletic teams. Teams working together for recruitment has shown to be really helpful for teams in the UK and Germany, for example. And Peru has been working really hard on development since the new president stepped up a couple of years ago, to a point where they are now not only growing the sport within their own NGB, but also in neighboring countries. So it feels like it's really important for not only teams to work together for recruitment, but also NGBs working together and sharing their resources in recruiting players. We've had the development fund being used to promote the sport and help recruitment, for example, by hosting tournaments to train referees, get media equipment to improve online presence and professionalism. On a long-term vision, youth Quidditch has the potential to be a good recruitment pipeline, but there's not many NGBs with active youth Quidditch programs or with the resources to run these, because this does take an additional amount of volunteers and resources. Those with good youth programs are already seeing this lead to recruitment. Media coverage of national and international tournaments can also help teams with recruitment. Germany has seen a large increase after the 2016 World Cup, and various NGBs have already indicated the benefits of attending World Cup and Continental Games, and the news coverage of their national team being a way for them to recruit. Just being able to show that their national team attended one of these events, regardless of their ranking at the end of the events.
Pauline, I'm so glad you brought up Germany, even if briefly, because I really think they are a standing model right now in Quidditch for how to grow. They are growing at incredible rates, and that is shown not just in their numbers of teams, but also their success on the international level. They were in the bronze medal game at the most recent European Championships, I believe. The way Germany has done it, to my understanding, and I'm not an expert to speak on Germany by any means, is they have gone younger, which is something else you were speaking to. It has really penetrated their high school scene. And because of that, people are going to college, staying involved there. They have their club teams, etc. Sometimes a place like Belgium, to my understanding, they're more club-based, or what we used to call community teams in the United States, and it can be harder to retain in that way. It's less of a clear pipeline of ages. In the US, I think one of the barriers that has kind of gone up on the recruiting side is that there's kind of a baseline athleticism to play at the national level right now. And I think that scares off some people who try to get into sport in a way that a decade ago, it was easier to just get involved in Quidditch. And, it was still kind of a fledgling sport. Now you're basically trying to join the sport a month later, you're playing in regionals against people who are seniors and have been playing the sport for 4 years and maybe played on an MLQ team over the summer. That can be really intimidating. So I think we really need to all kind of look at how we can firm up the pipelines, maybe in a way more like Germany has, in order to increase recruitment going forward.
Awesome, thanks, Ethan. Our next question. What do you think about Quidditch branding and its connection to Harry Potter? And Ethan, I'd actually like you to go first on this one, and then the floor is open to the rest of the group.
Sorry, I was on mute. Yeah, I think there's a lot to kind of unpack when you think about this question, which makes sense because we've had a long and complicated relationship with the Harry Potter branding. The first thing is I want to push back on a through line I've kind of heard, at least within the US community. I don't know how it kind of translates on the international scale, that Harry Potter is a piece of pop culture that's going away. From my perspective, both on a statistical and anecdotal viewpoint, that's just not the case. Harry Potter remains a very pivotal piece of fiction for kids. And just kind of on the anecdotal side, my goddaughter's 13 now. Harry Potter is her favorite piece of, she's a big reader, and Harry Potter is her favorite piece of literature. I was listening to a podcast the other day where one of the podcasters, he had never even was into Harry Potter, agreed to read it with his 8-year-old. They were going to kind of try to keep up with each other. And she just blew ahead of him and was 6 books ahead of him while he was still like finishing up the second book. I mean, on the statistical side, if you go to Amazon, sort by top young adult books, Harry Potter books are like 10 of the top 20 books. They're still top 10 bestsellers. The 2 of the 3 most high grossing books of all time are Harry Potter books. There might have been that half generation somewhere along there that was kind of too cool for the pop culture their older siblings like. So they're like, nah, we're not cool with Harry Potter. But now those older siblings are having kids and passing it along to them. And those kids are going to start getting those ages where we're talking about getting them in the youth pipelines early. On the college side of the sport, Harry Potter is still pivotal to recruitment. I talked to my kids at Harvard where I coach, and most of them decided to try out Quidditch because of their connections to Harry Potter. We did a survey, we being MLQ, earlier this year. 60% of college players said they were inspired to join Quidditch because of Harry Potter. It might not have been what kept them playing Quidditch, and there's a lot of great things that have kept people playing Quidditch, obviously, but it is still important to bring in. That said, it's not all sunshine when it comes to our relationship with the Harry Potter IP, and that's what makes this question complicated. I mean, the biggest thing is obviously the inherent ties to J.K. Rowling's transphobia. We're obviously a very inclusive sport. This is a very difficult thing for us to unpack. It also can be harder to recruit athletes due to the Quidditch ties. We even saw in the ESPN videos that kind of the Quidditch ties are what kind of led to a lot of the negative comments a couple weeks back. But the ultimate point is that Quidditch is probably never going to fully disconnect from Harry Potter, and nor do I think we should actively try. It's just the tie is always going to be there. We're still always going to have the brooms. We're still going to have the 3 hoops. I mean, Harry Potter is very, very recognizable IP in a world of IP. However, I don't think that has to take away from the athleticism and integrity Quidditch can obtain as a sport.
Thanks, Ethan. Does anyone else want to weigh in on this one?
Ditto.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Well, we'll move right along to the next question. Just a note, we're starting to see some questions coming in on the Q&A, so please keep them coming. We will be getting to questions at the end of the section after we get through our sort of pre-planned questions. So please send them in. We will address them. We're starting to get some interesting ones about rule books. All right, our next question. What can we do as a sport to address sexism and transphobia? And Yara, I believe you wanted to answer this one first.
Yeah, thank you. A massive question, one to which there's not a simple answer, though I'm sure anybody that attended the 3:30 panel today might all of us are a little closer to answering that question at any rate. But for those of you that didn't, some thoughts. I guess I'll first say that it's fitting that this question follows the Harry Potter question. Organizationally, as organizations and as individuals, I think we all need to work on being very explicit that we are not taking the transphobic elements of Harry Potter. And I also want to suggest that it's not just J.K. Rowling's transphobia that informs sort of the bad rap about this. We should probably be cautious about how elements of her texts actually incorporate some of those values and being very clear that that's not the part that we're taking from Harry Potter. We're literally only taking the sport. So I think that's a really important piece of this. Broadly, I think that I said this on Friday night, but different systems of oppression hold each other up. So, organizations that have not done enough to address racism, have not done enough to address classism are not, we're not there in terms of addressing transphobia. But I also want to say that we should probably work to be making very explicit distinctions between how we address sexism and how we address transphobia, because those are 2 very different things. And I was actually seeing in the chat with the rise of TERFdom, so that's trans exclusionary radical feminism. It's obviously something that has existed for a long time, but there is a bit of a resurgence of that philosophy in the last few years. And so with that rise, it's important to say, you know, the way that we are gender inclusive is explicitly for trans people. It's not in a way that discounts that. And I again, shout out to that 3:30 panel, because I thought they did an amazing job of separating that out. Organizationally, I think there's a few things that we could be doing. First, we need to be looking at policy level solutions. So on a very basic level, looking at our rules and regulations and how they might be enabling sexism and transphobia. I think the long-term goal for all of us is to work towards what is being called a max 3. Maybe we're not there yet. I think, you know, certainly I can speak for Canada in that if we were to, you know, force the hand of a max 3, a lot of teams would not be able to sustain that right now, but that needs to be, I think, a long-term goal of moving out of a sort of minimum quota approach to gender on the pitch. Apart from the rules and how the game is actually played, there are comprehensive policies in terms of how we're educating people about sexism and transphobia. Operationally, how we're ensuring that we're defining what harm means in the context of sexism and transphobia, making those definitions really clear. Mandating capacity building and training on those things for our coaches, because our coaches and our administrators on our leagues are ambassadors for our organization. So if we don't have shared understanding of that, then it's kind of a no-go. And then how we respond to harm in the context of sexism and transphobia is also important. So, you know, what are our harassment policies and how are we responding to that? At QC, we're currently, our board just announced at our AGM that we're going to be doing a harassment policy review. We're very privileged to have a human rights lawyer on our board of directors who's helping to lead that framework. So I think it needs to be a very comprehensive approach on the policy level. On the cultural level, so sort of on the ground and how sexism and transphobia manifest, a couple thoughts. One is, I think we see, and I don't have the statistics to back this up, but what I would suspect, and also from my own experience, is that women, trans people, and gender nonconforming people are overrepresented in the administration and the day-to-day invisible labor of our sport. So you're probably going to see a lot more of our men coaching and a lot less of our women and our gender nonconforming people in those roles, but they're probably like leading the charge in terms of running our organizations and volunteering at events. And so being conscious about how that is manifesting and working to combat that is a strategy that I think has not really been fully explored, at least in Quidditch, but is certainly an avenue for that. And then, you know, thinking about how we're accounting for the ways that women and trans people have been socialized out of sports, you know, and full contact sports environments specifically. And so how we can pay attention to that and actively combat that. There's been sort of a rise of women in trans specific spaces, a couple fantasy tournaments that have been really great for that. Looking at other development opportunities that can target women and trans people and gender nonconforming people. I think that's all great. And I've personally benefited from those kinds of things, and I'll do like a very specific shout out to the Coleman Clause and maybe pull in Dallas or Ethan if either of them wanted to speak to that, because, you know, as that Coleman Clause, I think really demonstrates what a targeted approach on a policy and a praxis level could look like in terms of combating sexism and transphobia. So yeah, lots of thoughts on this. I think a lot of people in the comments probably have similar thoughts, but yeah, I'll end there.
Yeah, I just want to touch on the Coleman Clause since Yara mentioned it. And there's a number of people here who are definitely not familiar with this. But in 2019, MLQ enacted a co-hiring requirement to begin to address the fact that after completing some surveys, despite 31% of the population of MLQ being made up of women and gender nonconforming, transgender, and genderqueer individuals, only 3 franchises had a gender minority assistant and head coach in 2018. And, you know, shout out to Lisa Coleman. They were our people ops director. This is named after them. Instrumental, conducted the surveying, came up with the phrasing for it, worked very hard to talk to other individuals in the community to make sure it was going to meet the requirements that we were looking to meet. And yes, thank you, Chris, for linking it. But for those who don't want to click on a link, under the clause, all franchises must meet at least one of the following requirements in their coach hiring process. The first is have at least one applicant for head coach or assistant coach that is a gender minority player. Or number two, hire at least one gender minority individual as a head coach or assistant coach. Or three, have a pre-existing head coach or assistant coach that is a gender minority player for the upcoming season. And again, the reason we use gender minority player is because, as you saw in our stats, women, gender nonconforming, transgender, genderqueer individuals were our gender minority. As I mentioned, the clause was based on a survey. This is something we'll continue to survey through the years. MLQ recently has been doing some surveys on sexism and transphobia, and this clause is ready to be updated with whatever we have to do to keep pushing this forward. I do want to point out so far it's been very successful. In 2020, we had 3 women as head coaches and 8 as assistant coaches. And we had 1 agender assistant coach. We're still in the hiring process for 2021, but we hope to improve upon that even further.
Thank you, Yara and Dallas, for all of that. It's awesome. I'd like to move to our next question. What can we do as a sport to improve the playing experience for BIPOC players in Quidditch? And I'd like to give the floor to Mary to start us off on this one.
Yeah, so the thing that I just want to call out here is that this needs to be just as much of a focus for us as addressing sexism and transphobia. The experience for Black, Indigenous, people of color in this sport has not been prioritized in the way that it needs to. And that's why USQ, QC, MLQ, and the IQA have been giving it more attention over the last year, and why it's going to continue to be part of the core of what we're doing in really examining what safety means, what does inclusion mean, and everything like that. So for USQ, we have developed pillars that help to articulate how we are going to be improving the experience for BIPOC players. So equity, inclusion, leadership, learning opportunities, recruitment and retention, spotlight, and safety. And I want to go more into detail on the safety aspect, because I believe that this is one of the most powerful ways that NGBs and those that host Quidditch tournaments can advocate for the experience of BIPOC players, and also for the experience of LGBTQIA+ players, because we need to be making the sport safe for people from all marginalized communities. So the BIPOC town halls from last summer that MLQ and USQ hosted brought up the impact of microaggressions and racist actions on community members. And those experiences happen at USQ events and at events around the world. And they make people feel like they're not accepted. And we as event organizers have a responsibility to ensure that the places that we are bringing our players to are safe, and that we are doing everything that we can to make sure that, like, ideally when they leave their door, when they're driving, when they're going to the airport, that they are having a safe experience, so that when they get to the tournament site, they are competing at their best level, and that they haven't been affected by, say, seeing a Confederate flag many times on the way driving down to South Carolina or something like that. So last fall, USQ was the first NGB to introduce safety requirements for event hosts, and these safety requirements address the experience of LGBTQIA+ and BIPOC attendees. And USQ has taken a strong stance against discriminatory legislation or policies that restrict the rights of marginalized communities, like 2 recent bills in the Utah State Legislature that thankfully do not seem to be passing, that targeted transgender youth's access to sports and medical treatment. NGBs can and should be advocates in this area of pushing back against systemic racism, transphobia, and other forms of discrimination that appear in cities around the US and around the world. You know, I appreciated Yara's framing from the keynote of talking about Orientalism and colonialism, because we all might have different terminologies for what oppression looks like in your country, but there are all similar ways that we can take a stance and as event organizers prioritize what safety means and use the power that we have and say, we will not bring our Quidditch tournament to this site if you are not a safe destination. Basically need to, you know, act on all of our words and all of our values. And on the team player level, I think it's important to be able to address microaggressions and racist actions on your team and also be able to confront implicit bias. So USQ, MLQ, and other leagues are developing implicit bias training. I think on the team level, creating pathways to report problematic behavior is really important, whether that's a player representative or a clear harassment policy or something. There should be a lot of transparency around how your players can be reporting behavior that is discriminatory. And then also on the organization side, we need to be supporting our team leaders by increasing awareness of the ways that, that you can report to, say, NGBs, Major League Quidditch, your Quidditch conference, and things like that. Excuse me, I have to cough for a while. But other people, please chime in because this isn't leaving me.
Alex, if it's okay, I just want to add,
Go for it, Yara.
First want to echo everything that Mary said. I think those are really specific, tangible steps we can take. Broadly, though, I just wanted to emphasize how important it is the further and deeper we get into the conversation about addressing racism and addressing colonialism in our sport, how important it is to separate out experiences for Black players, for Indigenous players, for otherwise racialized players. I think not just in Quidditch, but broadly when we talk about sort of the BIPOC movement, it's become an effective shorthand to talk about how we haven't addressed racism in the past and we're addressing it now. And that's a super important, it's a super important thing to do. But actually, like, I'm not Black, I'm not Indigenous, so I can only speak to my own experience. But from what I understand and the learning that I've been able to engage with, being Black is so different from being Indigenous, which is so different from being otherwise racialized, being a newcomer, and all of the ways that those things interact. So I think just for anybody listening, but also for us organizationally, it's going to be really important for us to foster a very catered approach to how each of those kinds of oppression manifest organizationally and on the ground. Yeah.
Thank you, Yara. So Mary talked a bit about safety on a somewhat related topic. What can we do within the game on the pitch to improve safety and reduce injuries in Quidditch? And we're going to go to Yara for the first answer on this one.
Sounds good. Thank you. So just before I jump in, I want to just situate our context in Canada a little bit. So for those of you that had the opportunity to listen to the panel by Arjun Patel and Aaron McCready yesterday, you'll know that QC, first of all, benefits from having 3 years of injury reporting data from 2017 to 2019. We had a partnership with a health center here in Canada, the Sunnybrook Health Sciences Center office, for injury prevention. So we were able to collect injury data for those 3 years. There's also some very specific legislation that's come into effect in Canada. So for those of you that don't know, it's called Rowan's Law, which is a concussion response law that takes effect here in Ontario. And because we're nationally legislated, but based in Ontario, it has put specific requirements for us as an organization to meet criteria in terms of player safety for athletes. So that's the context that our sort of safety framework comes from. I think that there are a few things, and actually it's funny because I'm seeing a lot of similarities in all of our responses with how we can approach it. But for me, a comprehensive safety framework starts with education. Like, how are we educating our players? How are we educating our coaches? How are we educating our volunteers? Ongoing research and data collection, making sure that we're making evidence-informed decisions with respect to policy and how we're, how our policy is actually enacting safety and reducing injuries. And then ongoing like what I call sort of cultural engagement, which I guess is just my shorthand for actually like talking with people and how they're people on the ground who are experiencing injuries, who are experiencing risks to safety in playing Quidditch, and allowing their experience to inform how we approach and how we move forward. One of the things that actually Aaron and Arjun really spoke to yesterday, which I've been sitting with for a long time, but Rowan's Law, where Rowan's Law comes from is Rowan was a girl in Ontario who died as a result of a concussion playing a sport. And in the development of that law, there were texts that she had shared with her teammates, essentially saying like, I'm going to do anything to play the sport, and like basically demonstrating that no injury was going to keep her from playing. And I had a very discomforting moment of self-consciousness reading those texts on Arjun's slides and remembering times when I had uttered something similar early in my Quidditch playing careers, when I had heard teammates uttering something like that and not challenged that and not, countered that. So I think, in terms of like how we disseminate safety across the league, that's going to be a really important thing to work on, is ensuring that everybody sees it as a responsibility to interject when a not safe mindset is being sort of pushed aside for the sake of competitiveness. And I think this is particularly important because the primary version of Quidditch that exists right now is a hyper-competitive version. There aren't that many sort of casual Quidditch, spaces. And so everybody who's participating in Quidditch right now is throwing their whole selves into that. That has huge implications for what kind of safety and what safety standard we're setting. The other short thing I just want to speak to on this is that the definition for safety needs to be very broad. So, often when we talk about player safety, we think about physical manifestations of safety, injuries, concussions, that sort of thing, torn ACLs. I'm sure we've seen them all, but physical safety is absolutely related to mental health and wellness. It's absolutely related to cultural safety. If you're participating in an event and you're concerned about experiences of harassment, if you're concerned about experiences of racism, you are not going to be in a good mindset to go on the field and play a Quidditch game. And that's going to put you at a risk for safety as well. So all of these things, I think, need to work together in order to really be able to respond to those kinds of risks.
Yeah, Yara, I like so much everything you were saying on the research aspect. It kind of made me think back to the statistics in Quidditch panel that we had yesterday, just in the fact that really a lot of sports statistics people think of as like, your box score stats, your basics, but a lot of sports statistics at a high level is actually asking a question and then going back, just like in any area of science, going back and using data to kind of find yourself an answer, right? You guys are obviously super lucky to have this incredible 3 years of injury reporting data. MLQ has some injury reporting data. It's more self-reported, so I don't claim at all that is anywhere as complete as you guys have. But I think it's important that we're never looking at injury and kind of responding to it in Quidditch as a one-size-fits-all issue, right? And you kind of touched on this. There's a big difference between the health concerns in a rec level Quidditch and Quidditch at the highest level. I think kind of something that really encompasses this for me that I think is a really good example is brooms up, right? So, I mean, me and Alex and some of the people on this panel have been in Quidditch forever. If in early Quidditch, people got injured on brooms up all the time. Like, it was surprising when a game didn't have an immediate stoppage for an injury. People kind of played the sport more, it became less of an issue. Now it's at a point where it comes up enough that USQ decided to make a rule change, which I fully support. I mean, we need to target injuries. MLQ, with our kind of injury reporting data, we haven't seen much in the way of injuries on brooms up at all. Probably because most of the people who run brooms up in MLQ have been playing the sport for 6-7 years and have been playing this role for 6-7 years. They're attacking in a very specific way. So that's not to say that MLQ doesn't also have injury risks that other leagues don't have. But it's important, I think, for us to kind of look at it in very much of a segmented way to make sure we're attacking the right injury concerns and not just the injury concerns that we're anecdotally talking in a community as the things we think are going on.
Definitely, yeah. And just to respond really quickly, one point of clarification I would want to make is that our injury reporting data, we have 3 years of it, and it only shows 5 to 7% reports from players. And like, as much as I would love to believe that only 5% of our players got injured, I know for sure that that's an underrepresentation because it relies so much on self-reporting. So I think, you know, to your point, Ethan, it's not just about like actively going into the data, but creating an environment where that kind of data can actually be collected effectively, which is tricky when it comes to like player health and all of the privacy laws around that, but something to consider for sure.
Thanks for the clarification, Yara. We're going to move on to our next question. What can we do to improve the long-term financial sustainability of Quidditch as a sport? And we have Mary slated to take this one on first.
Yeah, so we got a question in the Q&A about this as well that I want to address, which I'll read out after I give kind of the basics of what I'd like to talk about. So the first is that financial sustainability is going to look different for every organization. So like Yara talked about with looking at Quidditch Canada's priorities with other sport federations in Canada, they might not necessarily be making the same choices as USQ, which might not be making the same choices as MLQ or Quidditch Australia, Quidditch Mexico, France, Norway, Malaysia, all of that thing. So just all that to say, you know, we all have different priorities with what we're working on and what works for us in our specific context. And then just within that, you also have to take a look at the organization structure. So, you know, in the US, MLQ is a 501c4, but USQ is a 501c3. So as a 501c3 nonprofit organization, there are some things that constrain and restrain us with what we can do that, again, is going to make that sustainability picture a little bit different for each of us. So the key thing for this, and this addresses the question from the Q&A, which I'll read right now. I heard from each organization a need for financial stability, and I know the pandemic has challenged everyone in a new way. Is there a plan to move away from either members themselves or donors as the majority source of revenue? So for all organizations, we need more diversification in our revenue streams. And we've certainly seen the dangers of USQ, like as the comment or questioner as ties into that question, with our over-reliance on membership revenue to be supporting key operating costs. And that was a large reason why we found ourselves in a financial crisis last year. It's very complicated, so it's not just one thing, but it speaks to the importance of ensuring that you are looking at not just memberships, but also ticket sales, merchandise, grants and donations, and sponsorship. I don't think, at least for USQ, we're going to move away from memberships being a large portion of our revenue. Just at least in the foreseeable future, I don't see the other places that we could get funding from filling up the gap that we have, that we would have if we were to have a smaller portion of our revenue come from membership. I think that's a pretty standard model for sport organizations. I also think Quidditch, at least on the membership dues side, is fairly affordable. I know there are a lot of other costs that teams bear that they might not be paying to their national governing body or Quidditch League, but for at least the things that help sustain our costs, we are less expensive than other opportunities out there for college and adult athletes. That being said, I do think looking at the financial component of members of that being a barrier to entry, especially those from marginalized communities, is really important. And that's why, you know, everyone here is expanding their grant programs, because we recognize that while our membership dues are relatively low, everyone's financial situation is different, and we want to have an accessible, inclusive community. A couple other things I want to address regarding financial sustainability. So you know, USQ had a really big fundraiser last year, the Save Quidditch fundraiser. We were able to raise over $60,000 through donations and membership and merchandise, which was the most successful fundraiser we've ever had. And one of the things that I want USQ to be able to do now with our community, as well as potential community members, those that, you know, may be connected through a friendship or familiar tie, is to have more of an expectation that USQ is going to be making asks of these people to support us financially. Not that there is an expectation to give, just that this is one of the options that we have in our wheelhouse. And we want to be able to take advantage of it, partly so that, to the Q&A question about the reliance on membership and donations, so that we can take some of the pressure, I guess to say, off membership to be funding these core operating expenses that are key to some of the programs that we're able to do. And regarding sponsorship, I think that has a lot of potential in the next 5 to 10 years to really help us out financially. But I think we need to have substantial growth before we're able to see like game-changing title sponsorships, the kind that inject like tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of dollars into an organization, just from my own professional experience with all of that. So just to sum up, it's going to look different for everyone. You need to pay attention to organization structure and what options are available, and diversifying is really, really important for the long-term financial health of the sport.
Fantastic. Thank you, Mary. We're going to move ahead now. We have a question here. Our next question up. How can we continue to improve the visibility of the sport and increase the fan base? And in particular, in answering this question, taking this into context of how we recover from the effects of the COVID-19 pandemic. And Pauline is going to be leading this one off for us.
Yeah, so I think keeping up with the young people and the next generation is vital and is really going to help us with our visibility. Gen Alpha is coming and we need to get the word out to them. I know our generation may have a tough time with the newer apps coming out, but I think TikTok is a great way that we can engage with people and help increase our fan base. Influencers are a fantastic way to engage and access new audiences. And having more partnership like that could be really interesting and exciting for a future direction. Being able to partner with athletes from other sports as well, for example, and showing them, having them show our sports and play Quidditch. Other than TikTok, I feel like having a good online presence is key, as well as clean and informative websites. Diversifying our online presence is another great way to reach as many people as possible. Our community has done some brilliant work over the pandemic to showcase our sports and our community online. And I think more of that as we emerge on the other side will really help engage a new fan base and increase our visibility. As we recover from COVID, it's important not to focus on the past and instead look to the future and all exciting things we have to look forward to. And these are things that like new people and future players are going to stick around to see. And that could include things like putting more focus on live streams, putting more focus on filming our games and bringing them out and distributing them over various platforms. And I believe it's really, really important to increase our media presence and a stronger focus on that side as well.
Thanks, Pauline. All right, we're going to move now into our last question. I'd love to hear from everyone on this one, but we're going to start with Dallas. What are the biggest milestones you see ahead for the future of Quidditch?
Yeah, so obviously everyone will weigh in on this, and I'm really just going to give you the quick bullet points. While we were prepping for this session, we came together to discuss a number of milestones we feel are critical to the success of the sport. Again, this is by no means everything, right? This is not, there are micro pieces to this, there are even more macro pieces to this, but these are the ones that all of us agreed are critical to all of our league's success. So in no particular order, Diversify the faces you see on the pitch. Quidditch is a very white, male-dominated sport, and that needs to change. We touched on it quite a bit with the BIPOC discussions, sexism discussions. All weekend, you've heard from a variety of people who also emphasize this point. The panel earlier today on More Than a Body on the Field. Check out the Slack. There's a ton of content. Everyone wants this. Consistently have games available on sports television. Ethan touched on this a little bit. You know, we talk about legitimizing and normalizing the sport, and that's normal for the sport. I mean, you can see spike ball on TV now, and you can see weird things like beanbag toss and things like that. Why can't you see Quidditch? We need established youth and recreational forms of Quidditch. Quidditch Canada is doing a great job with youth right now, and that's something we all should be looking toward as an example. We need a steady increase in players each season. I don't think there's anyone here that would disagree with us on that. Every single league needs players, and we need these players to keep coming back. Membership revenue is really important to a number of leagues, while some of us like MLQ would like to eventually move away from that and have our players paid. There are other organizations that are going to forever have membership revenue as a piece of their pie. The next one is standardized equipment procurement. I don't think I really need to elaborate more there. We need standardized equipment. We need people producing equipment. Tuesday had a great panel earlier today on innovation. If you want to make equipment, you don't know how to get it off the ground, DM Tuesday. The next one is improve financial support for players, league staff, and referees. This means something different to a lot of us here. For MLQ, financial support for our players means the players are paid. Their transportation's paid for. Their housing's paid for. It doesn't cost them a dime to participate in our season. And you know, grants play into that, and grants play into that for every single one of our leagues. The next one is each league should have a headlining partner. MLQ has been super fortunate to work with VII Apparel since our inception. Quidditch Canada has that super exciting new one with VC Ultimate. Did I get that right, Yara? Great. And you know, we hope to see other leagues follow suit. The next is play at least one championship in a premium media market. This ties back into the sports television, the exposure, the legitimization. Media markets matter. It's great to be in some of these small towns and cities because you get that feel of like everyone's on board for your Quidditch championship, but you just don't get that same level of exposure if you're not in a premium media market. Next is dedicated and low turnover fan base. We talked about this a little bit earlier. MLQ wants you to put on your Toronto Raiders jersey, pick a Tana Crow in your fantasy lineup, and then go watch him play and scream at the TV when Atana scores a goal, or get really upset when he gets beat before scoring that goal. And then, you know, last but certainly not least, Quidditch needs to be accessible, and you need to be able to sit down and watch a game anywhere. And if anyone else would like to elaborate on any of those points, I'll throw it to you.
I have nothing to elaborate on because that is possibly the most comprehensive like wish list I've ever heard. But I have one thing to add that's like maybe a little bit more boring. But so I think Dallas, your list really touches on like where we want the sport to go. One milestone that I have in the back of my mind is organizationally, where do organizations want to go in terms of structure? And so this might not apply necessarily to MLQ, but I think broadly, you know, NSOs like USQ, like QC, I don't want to speak for USQ, Mary, but for QC, I want us to work on being an NSO. What I mean by that is like most people see NSO as most people see QC as primarily delivering one product right now, and that's league level play. So what does QC do? Oh, they do a regionals and they do a nationals, and that's sort of the end of the list. But as an NSO, we have a responsibility to think about like long-term visioning, like what are the coaching and administration resources? How are we producing programs for people of all ages? How are we thinking about long-term athlete development? What is the sports science that's informing how our sports develop? So I think there's a lot that needs to happen on the back end for us to do all of the stuff that Dallas, you listed on the front end. Yeah.
And I also have one more thing to add to this is increasing accessibility to the sport by making sure our resources are available in various languages so that people from all regions can easily step into the sport, such as the Q3, Q5 project is available in Spanish. It's a fantastic project, and I would love to see it available in more languages as well. And like Dallas said, having a self-sustainable sport financially, not having all our participants having to pay out of pocket to travel across the world to attend World Cup, for example, or to attend US nationals or tournaments that are very important for all of our players and athletes and volunteers.
Fantastic. Thank you all for your thoughtful answers on that question. We're now at the end of planned questions, so we're going to go into some Q&A here. A little bit of extra time on this panel. Ethan's been chomping at the bit to answer this question, so I hope the person that still asked it is here, because I think it's an anonymous asker. The question is, with 3 different sets of a Quidditch rule book, IQA, MLQ, USQ, do you think this harms the viability of the sport? Do drastic changes year after year to each rule book hamper the natural growth that the sport should normally take in regards to strategy and the way the average consumer follows and watches? In your opinion, when do you think Quidditch will finally settle down to one single universal set of rules? So a few questions in one. Go for it, Ethan.
Yeah, Alex, I appreciate you fitting this in. I've really enjoyed the Q&A. I've been very excited about some of the questions. I'm excited we're getting to a couple of them. Short answer, does 3 different sets of Quidditch rulebooks potentially harm the viability of the sport? Way, way less than it would if we just kept playing championships like the US Quidditch Cup 10 Championship. If you want to get even more extreme, way, way less than it would if we never changed the sport from when I started playing it and we had no seeker floor, snitch could run off pitch, games could take literally 5 seconds. We're a slightly over a decade old sport. When baseball was a decade old, it was still called rounders and it had rules that you would never recognize in a million years. We need to keep aggressively changing the rules until we get a set that makes us an appealing sport. There's kind of this quicksand almost where people are kind of comfortable with where the rules are, but we're not at a good rule set yet. And that's why we keep changing them on a yearly basis. We can't have, and I'm sorry to keep going back to this US Quidditch Cup 10 final, just because it is just the ultimate standpoint where a player stood in place basically for 7 straight minutes, the most unentertaining sporting event I think I've ever watched. We can't be hesitant when things like that happen. We have to keep making moves. And because these 3 organizations can't always be collaborating at all the time, they can't always change together. And I think these 3 organizations credit, they've gotten better at working off of each other's rules in a really productive way. But they're probably not always going to be identical. I don't know if we'll ever settle down to a single universal set of rules. To be fair, most sports don't. Most sports have a different college, in the United States, have a different college rule book than a professional rule book. And it doesn't hinder those sports. So that's kind of my take on that, I'm really less worried about changing the rule book than leaving it in a bad place.
Yeah, and for the US side, this was the ability for the US to have its separate rulebook was something that we were really passionate about ensuring could still happen as the IQA was starting to make some big changes a couple of years ago, because I have a sports league to run with the help of 99 people on my staff, and MLQ has their amazing organization to run, and Quidditch Canada does, and Quidditch Australia, poor Quidditch Australia runs on a completely different cycle than everyone. And I think having the flexibility to be able to do what's working for us, I think that makes us more responsive. And like Ethan said, we're collaborating with one another better than we have been in any time in my 6 years in the sport. And I think we need to continue to allow innovation to happen. Like Pauline said, how many resources the IQA puts towards translations. Imagine it's already, I know it is difficult for a rules team to operate already to come up with the best rules for a single country when you're all speaking the same language. And I just think allowing us to do what works for us while sharing resources is going to continue to be the best thing for us.
Fantastic. Thanks for answering that question, guys. Our next question is from Betsy. She asks, how would you recommend someone gets involved in the volunteering side of the sport, and where do you think a good place to start is? And Pauline has volunteered to take the first stab at answering.
Yeah, volunteering for the sport is not that difficult. You can start with volunteering for your team. Many teams need people to step up in leadership roles there. Volunteering at a tournament. All tournaments need more volunteers in almost any position. To run a tournament, you need a lot of volunteers. Your national governing body, you can likely go to the website of Quidditch Canada, US Quidditch, or your national governing body if you're not in either of these two. MLQ also has a volunteer with us or similar type page on their website, and so does the IQA. You can reach out through Facebook pages or message volunteers themselves and ask about opportunities. All of our organizations are dying to get more volunteers, and will definitely look with you what the best possible position for you is. So would definitely recommend reaching out to people to help out.
I just want to tag on to that really quickly. Something else I also think is important to emphasize is a lot of people will go to these volunteer pages, right? And they'll be like, there's not really anything that fits what I want to do, or there isn't really anything that fits my skill set, or I don't think I have the experience to fill a role that says manager behind it. If you're not sure what to do, but you want to work with the organization, send us an email. We all have some sort of info ad or recruiting emails. It's all on our websites. Or, DM someone from our organization and be like, hey, look, I want to do this, but I'm not sure what to do. There are so many opportunities, and we're happy to help you place it. Like I mentioned this earlier, we bring in assistants for each of our departments. And part of the experience of being an assistant in MLQ is literally dabbling in every single department, so you can find what you want to do. There's no sort of like timestamp on how long you can be an assistant in MLQ, but we've been really fortunate so far that I think every executive assistant we've had has moved on to a different role within a year because they just found something they love. And if they don't want to, that's fine. They can dabble in everything, like get a great experience. I highly recommend reaching out to like Kellen Cupid. He is our current executive assistant. He's phenomenal. And I'm sure he would love to talk to you about what he's learned at MLQ and like some of the openings and what he would recommend doing, even for other organizations.
Yeah, I'm surprised you didn't mention our new generalist role either. I was
going to, and I was like, oh.
Yeah, we have a generalist role now. If you don't really know how you want to fit in the organization, you can apply for that, and we can kind of work towards something. But I wanted to talk on a more broad spectrum instead of just talking about MLQ. The thing I loved about Quidditch and that kept me really addicted to Quidditch when I first got involved is kind of unique. I think at least I was addicted to the fact that it was a new sport, and because of that, everything still needed to be done, and you could do whatever you wanted. And a decade in, that has changed to a degree, but I don't think it's fully changed yet. So I'll give you an example. Like about a decade ago, I founded the Eighth Man, which is a Quidditch media site that I'm sure a lot of people are familiar with. And I guess you can say that, yes, now there are Quidditch media sites. That said, Fast Break News just exploded into the Quidditch media scene. They said, we have the will to create Quidditch media, so they created it. They're doing a fantastic job. Shout out to all of them. They also host the Quidditch Jeopardy, super well run event on Friday, so shout out to them. I said there wanted to be like a professional league, so me and Dallas founded Major League Quidditch. And yes, now there is that league already, but at the same time over in Europe, Jack founded QPL. So we're still an infant sport. There are less people who want to do something than there are things that need to be done. If something really excites you, if something really interests you, push forward and do it. And you can, if you put the work in, you can have success in that. And as everyone else was saying, all of our organizations are always looking for volunteers. So reach out and we would love to get you involved.
I think that's really well said, Ethan. We have a question here specifically for US Quidditch. What does the sport of Quidditch look like under USQ? Does USQ want to be a more competitive sports league, or is it wanting to be a more casual recreational league?
I like to think of USQ as a big tent. And if you want to play Quidditch and you want to play it at the youth level, college level, or club level, I want USQ to have a competitive experience that excites you and challenges you to whatever degree that is. So on the college side, you know, I've been hearing this weekend from college players that they would love additional competitive opportunities there. So that's something we're looking at. I just don't think it should be USQ's place as both it really as a national governing body for us to be making the decision on how you, a player, should be interpreting the sport. I think it's on us to say, okay, here are the rules. You interpret this in your way, and we're going to provide you with structured competitive experiences that speak to that. But I don't think it's on us to say it needs to be, you know, recreational or competitive or whatever. If there are enough people that want a specific kind of experience, then we can create structure around them. And I think, and that was unfortunately one of the consequences of the COVID pandemic, was not being able to test out the open division idea for nationals. I think that's a great example of USQ looking to create another competitive experience for teams that maybe weren't fitting into what was offered before. So I'm hoping we can continue to be more responsive in that area to serve those who want to be playing with us and what their priorities are.
Fantastic. Thank you, Mary. So there's some more questions here that we will follow up with directly after, because we're actually 10 minutes past our slated ending time. I'd like to close here with, well, first by thanking all of you for joining us, and then I'd like to read a brief statement that the group here has drafted together with contribution from our panelists. So based on our conversation today, there's still a lot to be done in Quidditch. If we want to grow, we need to make some big changes, especially in recruiting and retaining players and improving the playing experience in a number of ways. We need to get more organized as a sport, improve our digital footprint, support younger teams and players in the community, and create a culture of empathy and respect. We are all here today because of what we believe this sport is capable of. We wouldn't be here if we didn't think Quidditch was cool and amazing. Despite our differences as organizations and as members of this community, we all believe in Quidditch, and we believe it's a sport worth investing in. And in order to take it to the next level, we have to take strong stances on inclusion and equity, strive towards long-term financial sustainability, pursue aggressive growth, continue to define the sport as its own entity, and reach for new levels of gameplay. The only way we can reach these goals is by doing it together. I encourage you to take what you've learned this weekend, take your inspiration, and as Ethan said, go do something with it. Go out there and turn your ideas into reality. We promise to do our best with you as long as you all also promise to do your best with us. Thank you.
Thank you all so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.